My parents threw away my 8-year-old daughter's drawings, and when I confronted them, my mother said, "They're garbage anyway." So I waited until the housewarming party for their newly renovated home, and in front of all their friends, I served them eviction papers. You've never seen the color drain from a person's face so fast. It started, as it always did, with the smell of lemon cleaner and expensive hand soap. That was my mother's signature scent for a family gathering. A sterile chemical brightness meant to signal that everything was perfect, spotless, under control. We were there for Sunday dinner, a mandatory performance of familial bliss. My daughter Lily clutched a large flat cardboard portfolio to her chest. It was her most prized possession, holding what she called her masterpieces. My sister Megan was already there, draped over a new dove gray sectional that probably cost more than my car. Her husband Chad stood by the massive quartz countertop island, holding a craft beer like a scepter. He was nodding along to whatever my father was saying, a practiced sycophantic gesture he'd perfected years ago. "Sarah, you're late," my mother announced from the kitchen, not as a greeting, but as a verdict. She wiped an invisible speck from the stainless steel refrigerator. "Traffic was bad, Mom," I said, the familiar excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. It didn't matter what the reason was. Being late was a flaw in her perfect afternoon, and the flaw was always me. Lily, however, was oblivious. She was vibrating with excitement. "Grandma! Grandpa! Look!" She carefully placed the portfolio on the floor and unlatched it. Inside were dozens of pages filled with her vibrant, imaginative worlds. There were rainbow-colored dragons with spaghetti wings, castles floating on clouds of cotton candy, and a surprisingly detailed portrait of our cat, Mittens, wearing a monocle. My father glanced down. Nice, kiddo." He immediately turned back to Chad, resuming his lecture on property taxes. My mother was less generous. She eyed the portfolio on her brand new hardwood floors as if it were a mud puddle. "Lily, honey, let's not make a mess. We just had these floors installed." "It's not a mess, Grandma. It's my art," Lily said, her small voice unwavering. She was proud. It was a beautiful thing to see, that unscarred pride. I felt a familiar, fierce urge to protect it, to build a wall around it so the casual asset of my family couldn't touch it. Megan drifted over, a glass of white wine in her hand. She peered down at a drawing of a smiling sun wearing sunglasses. Cute, very simple. The word hung in the air, a tiny passive-aggressive dart. Lily's smile flickered. She looked at me, a silent question in her eyes. I gave her a reassuring nod and knelt beside her. "These are amazing, sweetie. I especially love the one with the mermaid riding a unicorn." "She has a name," Lily whispered to me. "Her name is Sparklefin." My mother clapped her hands together, a sharp, ugly sound that meant business. "All right, that's enough. We're about to eat. Sarah, put this thing somewhere out of the way." The thing was my daughter's heart, splayed out on paper. But I did as I was told. I always did. I helped Lily carefully pack her drawings back into the portfolio and found an empty corner in the back hallway to lean it against the wall. "It'll be safe here," I promised her. A promise I had no idea I wouldn't be able to keep. Family politics are their own kind of landmine. You learn to walk a certain way, to test the ground before you put your weight down. My entire life had been a masterclass in navigating that treacherous field. I was the scapegoat, the designated problem child. Megan was the golden one, the sun around which my parents orbited. I remember being 10. My father had just bought a delicate antique ship in a bottle, his prized possession. He placed it on the mantel with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. Megan, who was 8, wanted to see it up close. She climbed onto a chair, lost her balance, and the whole thing came crashing down, shattering into 1,000 pieces of glass and splintered wood. I was in the other room, reading. I heard the crash and her gasp. When I ran in, she was standing there, her eyes wide with terror. Before I could even ask what happened, she pointed a trembling finger at me and screamed, "Sarah did it!" My parents came running. They saw the wreckage, they saw Megan's tears, and they saw her pointing finger. That was all the evidence they needed. There was no trial, no questions, just a verdict, swift and brutal. I was grounded for a month. My allowance was docked to pay for a replacement my father never bought. But the worst part was the disappointment in his eyes, a look that said, "I knew you were careless. I knew you couldn't be trusted. I tried to defend myself. I was in my room. I didn't do it." "Don't lie, Sarah," my mother had said, her voice cold. "It's bad enough you broke it. Lying makes it so much worse. Megan never confessed. Years later, she'd bring it up at Christmas dinner, laughing. Remember that time I broke Dad's ship and blamed you? Oh my God, you were so mad. She said it like it was a funny story, a cute childhood antic. My parents would chuckle along. Oh, that's just Megan, my dad would say, ruffling her hair. No one ever apologized. No one ever acknowledged that I was punished for something I didn't do. They just absorbed it into the family lore, another amusing tale of Megan's mischievousness and Sarah's unfortunate proximity to trouble. It was the same with everything. I got a full academic scholarship to the state university. My parents' reaction was a muted, well, that's practical. When Megan got accepted to a private art school with a C average, an acceptance heavily subsidized by my parents' checkbook, they threw a party. A full-blown catered affair with a banner that read, "Our star is on her way." I learned to swallow my achievements, to make them small and palatable so they wouldn't challenge the established narrative. I learned that my role was to be the responsible one, the stable one, the one who didn't cause trouble. I became an accountant. It was a sensible career. Megan, meanwhile, floated from one passion project to another, funded by an endless stream of parental support. She was a jewelry designer for 6 months, then a potter, then an aspiring influencer. Each failed venture was met with sympathetic sighs and more money. My one request for help with a down payment on a small condo was met with a lecture on financial responsibility, so I learned to not ask. I learned to be self-sufficient. I learned to build my own life, a small quiet island away from the turbulent waters of my family. And when Lily was born, my purpose sharpened. It wasn't just about my own survival anymore. It was about protecting her. I wanted her to grow up feeling seen and valued in a way I never had. I wanted her pride to be a fortress, not a fragile thing to be hidden away. That Sunday, after dinner, my mother made her big announcement. As you all know, your father and I have been working so hard on this house. We're finally ready to show it off. We're having a housewarming party in 2 weeks, a big one. It's more of a renovation reveal, Megan corrected her, swirling her wine. Housewarming sounds so middle class. My mother beamed. Exactly, a renovation reveal party, and we need to do a final deep clean before then. Your father and I are getting too old to haul everything to the dump. She looked directly at me. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. My stomach tightened. Mom, I have to work this week. Take a day off, she said, waving her hand dismissively. It's just numbers. This is family. We need to clear out all the old junk in the garage and the back hall. My eyes darted to the corner where Lily's portfolio was leaning. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. There's some important stuff back there, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It's all junk, Sarah. Old boxes, leftover construction materials. Things need to be purged. My mother spoke of purging things the way a zealot speaks of cleansing sin. For her, clutter was a moral failing. I should have grabbed the portfolio right then. I should have taken it out to my car and locked it in the trunk. But I didn't. Because I was still that 10-year-old girl, trained to not make waves, to not be a problem. I thought, it's fine, it's in a portfolio. No one would mistake that for trash. It was a catastrophic failure of imagination. I was still operating under the assumption that my family was capable of basic consideration. The next day, I got a text from my mother. House is looking so much better. Your father and I made a huge dump run. Cleared out all that junk in the back hall. A clean slate. My heart hammered against my ribs. I called her immediately. Mom, Lily's art portfolio was in the back hall. There was a pause. The big cardboard thing? Yes, the big cardboard thing. Please tell me you didn't throw it out. My voice was shaking. Oh, for heaven's sake, Sarah, don't be so dramatic. It was just a bunch of scribbles. We had to make room. The air left my lungs. You threw it away? You threw away her drawings? They're garbage anyway, she said, her voice laced with that familiar, weary impatience, the tone she always used when I was being too sensitive. She's 8. She'll make more. Honestly, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. I hung up the phone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Something inside me went very, very still. It was the silence after a massive explosion, the ringing in your ears when the world has been irrevocably altered. The truth was a weapon, and she had just handed it to me. She hadn't just thrown away some paper. She had confirmed in the clearest possible terms that my child's heart was, to her, disposable. It was junk. Telling Lily was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I sat on the edge of her bed that night, my own throat tight with unshed tears. I explained what happened as gently as I could. Her face, usually so bright and expressive, crumpled. She didn't have a tantrum. She didn't scream or rage. She just curled into a tight little ball and sobbed, a deep, wounded sound that tore through me. But Sparklefin was in there, she whispered into her pillow, and the monocle cat. I held her, rocking her back and forth, my mind a maelstrom of fury and grief. This was not a broken ship in a bottle. This was not a forgotten achievement. This was a deliberate act of cruelty against a child, my child, and it was the last one I would ever tolerate. The peacemaker in me died that night. The doormat was buried, waiting for them to change, to see me, to value my daughter. It stopped being an option. In the quiet of Lily's room, with the scent of her lavender shampoo in the air, a new resolve settled over me. It was cold and hard and clear. This ends now. The next morning, I went to the bank and opened my mother's old safe deposit box. The key had been on my keychain for years, given to me after my grandmother passed, along with a cryptic instruction from Grandma herself. Don't open it unless you have no other choice. When you feel like you're at the bottom of the well, this is your ladder. I was at the bottom of the well. Inside, nestled amongst some of her old jewelry and war bonds, was a thick manila envelope. My hands shook as I pulled it out. It contained 2 documents. The first was the original deed to my parents' house. The second was a meticulously drafted trust document, signed and notarized 20 years ago. I sat in the cold, sterile viewing booth of the bank and read. You can smell a lie the way you can smell a renovation. Both try to cover up what's underneath. My entire life had been built on a lie. The house, the one they were so proud of, the one they had used as a financial launchpad for my sister and a symbol of their success, was not theirs. It was mine. My grandmother, a woman who saw the family dynamics with piercing clarity, had bought the house outright and placed it in a revocable trust. My parents were named as trustees, allowed to live there under the strict condition that they maintain the property. The trust stipulated that upon my 35th birthday, or upon the birth of my first child, the trusteeship would dissolve and the property would transfer, free and clear, into my name. I was 36. Lily was 8. The house had legally been mine for years. My parents had been living in my house, renovating my house, and, as I would soon discover, borrowing against my house. They had told me my grandmother sold it before she died to pay for medical bills. They had crafted an elaborate story of financial hardship and filial sacrifice. It was all a fabrication. The silence in that little room was absolute. The weight of their decades-long deception settled on me, a physical pressure. But underneath the shock, something else was stirring. It was the cold, hard resolve from the night before, now being honed into a sharp edge. My grandmother hadn't just left me a house. She had left me a weapon. She had left me the truth, sealed in an envelope, waiting for the day I was finally ready to use it. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I carefully folded the documents, placed them back in the envelope, and walked out of the bank. The world outside seemed sharper, the colors more intense. The path forward, which had always been a murky, compromised mess of trying to keep the peace, was now a straight, bright line. I drove to the office of Arthur Vance, the lawyer whose name was on the trust document. He was an old man now, with kind eyes and a handshake as firm as granite. He remembered my grandmother fondly. Eleanor was one of the sharpest women I ever knew, he said, gesturing for me to sit. She didn't miss a thing. I laid the documents on his wide mahogany desk. She left me this. My parents told me the house was sold. He put on his reading glasses and studied the papers. A slow, grim look settled on his face. He was silent for a long time. Finally, he looked up at me over the rims of his glasses. They never notified my office that the conditions of the trust had been met. They were legally obligated to initiate the transfer of title the day your daughter was born. My stomach dropped. So, they've just been living there, illegally? As trustees, they had the right to reside there. But the moment Lily was born, their status changed. They became tenants in your property without a lease, and any financial actions taken using the house as collateral after that date. He trailed off, his expression darkening. Sarah, did you know they took out a home equity line of credit against the property 3 years ago? I felt dizzy. What? No, how? They would have had to misrepresent their ownership status to the bank. That's bank fraud, Sarah. He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. For $150,000. $150,000! The cost of Megan's last failed business venture, a boutique that sold overpriced candles. The cost of the new kitchen, the quartz countertops, the hardwood floors. They had been renovating my house with my money, stolen from my inheritance, all while telling me to be more financially responsible. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it nearly knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was theft. It was a crime. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Arthur Vance took off his glasses and polished them slowly. "Well," he said, a glint in his eye that reminded me so much of my grandmother. "The first thing we do is get the title officially transferred into your name. That's just paperwork. The second thing, well, that depends on how you want to handle this." "I want it to stop," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I want them out of my house, and I want them to understand that there are consequences. For everything." A slow smile spread across his face. "I think your grandmother would be very proud of you right now. Let's get to work." The next 2 weeks were a blur of focused activity. Arthur handled the legal side, fast-tracking the title transfer. My part was to gather evidence. It wasn't hard. I went through old emails, finding the ones where my mother described their struggle after selling Grandma's house. I screenshotted text messages from Megan, showing off pictures of the renovation, captioned, "Mom and Dad are spoiling me. New art studio." The art studio was in what was supposed to be Lily's bedroom. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. The final pieces of the plan fell into place. We had the official, notarized deed with my name on it. We had the bank records showing the fraudulent loan. And we had an official notice of eviction, drawn up by Arthur, giving them 30 days to vacate the premises. We also had a formal letter demanding repayment of the $150,000 with the threat of legal action and fraud charges if they failed to comply. The plan was simple. The execution needed to be flawless. My mother's renovation reveal party was the perfect stage. It was their moment of ultimate triumph, a celebration of their success built on a foundation of lies. I would not let them have it. On the day of the party, I dressed carefully. I chose a simple navy blue dress, no armor. My grandmother once told me, "You don't need armor when you have the truth. You just need dignity." I did my makeup, styled my hair. I looked calm, collected. Inside, my heart was a frantic drum, but on the surface, I was a placid lake. Lily was at a friend's house for a sleepover. This was not something she needed to see. This was my battle, fought for her future. I picked up Arthur and we drove to the house, my house. As we pulled up, I could see the party was in full swing. The lawn was perfectly manicured, fairy lights were twinkling in the trees, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses spilled out of the open front door. They had invited everyone, friends, neighbors, the whole cast of flying monkeys from our extended family. We walked up the stone pathway. My stomach churned. For a second, the 10-year-old girl inside me wanted to turn and run. But then I thought of Lily's tear-streaked face, of her whispered "Sparklefin," and the cold resolve washed over me again. My mother met us at the door, her face a mask of social perfection. When she saw me, her smile tightened. When she saw Arthur, a man she hadn't seen in 20 years, a flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Sarah, you came," she said, "and you've brought a guest." "Hello, Carol," Arthur said, his tone polite but cool. "John, good to see you." My father turned, a drink in his hand. His jovial party host expression faltered. He recognized Arthur. I saw the flash of panic in his eyes before he masked it. "Arthur Vance, what a surprise! What brings you here?" "I'm here on behalf of my client," Arthur said, gesturing to me. Megan and Chad materialized at my parents' side, a united front of smugness. "Oh, God! What is it now, Sarah?" Megan sighed, rolling her eyes. "Can't you just try to be normal for one night? Don't ruin the party." "I have no intention of ruining anything," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here to correct a clerical error." The small commotion had drawn a crowd. My Aunt Sheila, my Uncle Mark, a few of my parents' closest friends, they were all watching, curious. This was exactly what I wanted. An audience. My father tried to take control, to steer us into his study for a private chat. "Let's not do this out here. Whatever this is, we can discuss it in private." "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it had the force of a slammed door. We're going to do this right here. You were so proud to show off this house. I think everyone should know its story." My father was about to make a toast. He had a champagne flute in his hand and was tapping it with a knife to get everyone's attention. It was the perfect moment. "If I could have your attention, please," Arthur said, his lawyerly voice cutting through the party chatter. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at us. My father's hand, holding the knife, froze mid-tap. "My name is Arthur Vance," he began. "I was the executor of Eleanor Albright's estate." He nodded toward the portrait of my grandmother that hung ironically in the main hall. "Many of you knew Eleanor. You knew her to be a generous but very shrewd woman." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. My mother's face was pale. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. "Eleanor was very deliberate in her planning," Arthur continued. "She wanted to ensure her granddaughter Sarah was taken care of. Which is why, 20 years ago, she purchased this property and placed it in a trust for Sarah's benefit." A confused murmur went through the crowd. I could see my Aunt Sheila whisper something to my uncle. My mother finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous! Arthur, I think you've had too much to drink. This is our house. We bought it." It was a weak, flimsy lie, and it crumbled the moment it left her lips. Arthur held up a hand. "Let me be very clear. The trust stipulated that John and Carol could reside here as trustees, but that the ownership of the property would transfer to Sarah upon the birth of her first child. Sarah's daughter, Lily, was born 8 years ago." He turned and looked directly at my parents. "The house has been legally hers since that day." He pulled a document from his briefcase. It was the newly issued deed. "This is a certified copy of the current title deed for this property. As you can see, the legal owner is Sarah Jennings." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth was a bomb that had just gone off in the dead silence of the room. The shockwave rolled over the guests, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Then came the moment. The one I will replay in my mind forever. The color drained from my mother's face, my father's skin went gray. Megan's mouth fell open, a perfect, horrified, "Oh!" Chad looked like he was going to be sick. It was the pale face moment, the instant the lie dies and the liar is left standing naked in the rubble. We were managing it for her," my father stammered, his voice cracking. "It was an investment. We were improving the property for her benefit." "By taking out a fraudulent home equity loan for $150,000? Arthur shot back, his voice like ice. "An act for which the bank is considering pressing charges?" That was the kill shot. The room erupted in gasps. Megan let out a small, strangled squeak. She knew exactly where that money had gone. My mother turned on me, her eyes wild with desperation and fury. "How could you do this? In front of all our friends? You're ruining everything. We're family." There it was. The final pathetic guilt trip. The last weapon in her empty arsenal. I looked at her, at the woman who had called my daughter's heart garbage, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty calm. The years of hurt, of striving for her approval, had been cauterized. "Family doesn't steal from a child's inheritance," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Family doesn't throw a little girl's art in the trash." I stepped forward and handed the second envelope to my father. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely take it. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises," I said. "That is a legal notice of eviction. That second document is a formal demand for repayment of the money you stole. You've been served." Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. No one moved, no one spoke. The party was over. Arthur and I turned and walked out the door. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. I could feel the wreckage of their lives collapsing behind us. The aftermath was exactly as you'd expect. It was swift and brutal. They couldn't fight the eviction. The legal ground was solid iron. Their friends, the ones who had witnessed the public humiliation, melted away like snow in spring. Reputations, especially in a small suburban town, are fragile things. The story of their fraud and deceit spread like wildfire. They tried to rally the flying monkeys. My Aunt Sheila called me, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Sarah, your mother is devastated. You're tearing this family apart over a house." "The family was already apart, Sheila," I told her. "I'm just sending out the death certificate. And it's not about a house. It's about $150,000 they stole from my daughter." She had no answer for that. None of them did. Funny what urgency does when it's tied to money. Their loyalty to my parents evaporated the moment they realized the bank of mom and dad was officially and permanently closed. Megan was the most vitriolic. She left me a string of furious voicemails, screaming that I had ruined her life, that she and Chad would have to sell their condo, that I was a selfish, vindictive monster. She never once mentioned Lily or the drawings. It had never been about that for them. It had only ever been about what they were owed. My parents managed to scrape together enough money to repay the loan by selling off nearly everything they owned of actual value. They moved into a small, sad rental apartment on the other side of town. I heard from a cousin that my mother spends most of her days complaining about how ungrateful I am. They never apologized. They never acknowledged what they did. They just regretted getting caught. 30 days later, the house was empty. It smelled of stale air and defeat. They had taken their furniture, but left behind a wake of petty destruction, scratches on the new floors, a wine stain on the quartz countertop. A final, pathetic act of defiance. I hired a cleaning crew. And then Lily and I moved in. The first thing we did was paint. We painted over the sterile, lifeless gray my mother had chosen with bright, warm colors. We filled the walls with life. And in the room that was supposed to be Megan's art studio, I set up a proper one for Lily. I bought her a real easel, professional paints, charcoal pencils, and canvases of every size. We spent our first weekend framing every single new picture she drew. We hung them in the hallway, the living room, the kitchen. We covered the walls with her imagination. There were more dragons, more castles, and a brilliant new portrait of Mittens wearing a top hat. The house stopped being a crime scene and started being a home, our home. Life became quiet, it became safe, it became boring in the best possible way. There were no more mandatory Sunday dinners, no more walking on eggshells, no more making myself small. Lily blossomed. The quiet, hesitant little girl was replaced by a confident, happy kid who wasn't afraid to take up space, to be proud of her creations. Sometimes I stand in the hallway and just look at her drawings. Each one is a testament to the decision I made. Each vibrant splash of color is a brick in the wall I built around her, the one my family could never breach again. They didn't just throw away her drawings, they threw away their only chance of ever being in her life. And in doing so, they gave us both our freedom. It was a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. The peace we have now is priceless. It was earned. So what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more.